The first thing, I just want to cover a bunch of information that they're just questions that I get all the time from people who are applying to the school. And some of it is, there's lots of schools and there's lots of places you can get educated. But what is really, really important is the relationship between yourself and the school. And you have to find a place that's right for you. Lawrence Tech is a private university. It's a teaching university and it's an applied research school. And what that means for us is that our priorities is actually the transfer of knowledge to other people. It prioritizes, it really does prioritize our interactions with students. You're not being taught by PhD grad students, or you're not being taught by master students, or you're not being taught by TA. You're actually being taught by faculty who know what they're doing in their fields. The other thing that I think people really have to understand in online education is that online education really consists of two different things. One is what is called synchronous contact, and the other one is asynchronous contact. And synchronous contact is this. In real time, we're all speaking to each other, and we have a dialogue where there's a back and forth. Asynchronous contact is the type of content where I put something up, and you come whenever you feel like it, you access it, you fill in a form, you send it off, and it disappears in a day or 2 days or 3 days later, you get some sort of response. We could look at it as a difference between going to the premiere of a movie, the first hour it comes out, which is synchronous contact, versus Netflix and on demand, which is asynchronous contact. Those formats are actually really, really quite important to understand because they change the way you interact with the schools that you are looking to go to study at. Next. The other thing when we start looking at the difference between synchronous and asynchronous information is that not every course has the same type of structure to it. And so when we deal with lectures versus labs versus studios, those are really different types of delivery methods to the type of information that we're dealing with. When we look at online education, most online education actually addresses lectures because lectures are quite easy to deal in an online environment. They're about, I would say, somewhere between 70 and 80% of a lecture course is actually something that we can offset into an asynchronous format. We can record lectures, we can put read-ins into PDFs, we can send out prompt sheets, and it's really information that is easily encapsulated into a digital format. Labs, workshops are a little bit different. They require a lot of more applied and hands-on stuff. And when we get to the studio, we're really in a completely different type of educational environment. And the reason for this is the type of information that we deal with in studio, especially the type of information we deal with in design. Next. And the type of information is this. It's tacit, dynamic, and systems-based. And the problem with this type of information, which is the core of our architectural education, is that I can teach you the principles of something, but we have no idea how those principles are going to react until we put it into a context. And that context has multiple things going on, and everything looks different depending on the overall structure of that system. And so while we might talk about the application of, say, a formal system such as ordering system such as Access, depending on what context we put it in, that Access is going to operate in different ways, which requires a type of education which is much more direct, one-on-one, and very particular to exactly what that person is looking at. Next. And so
Hey, Philip.
Yes.
Maybe you should just explain what that last slide was.
Why is that guy wearing a mask?
That is Stephen Coy, and you need to look him up because he's a world famous graffiti and street artist who's on our faculty, and he's part of the what's his corporation? The League of, escaping me at the moment. So this is actually in one of our lecture halls at the university. This is the very, very, very first semester basic design class. It's interesting because everybody's sitting there on computers. And so we're actually all sitting in the classroom communicating with each other through our laptops and phones and slates because we're transferring information back and forth and talking to each other. And Steve is walking through the room just trying to make sure that people understand that their bodies are within a certain type of space. So he's getting their attention. but it's this is the way, when this is a workshop, is the way that we teach foundations. It's really fast paced and pretty intensive, but we transfer a whole set of really foundational conceptual principles of how design operates. But again, we change modalities all the time depending on what type of information we're dealing with. Now that Carl has completely thrown me off my script, thank you very much, Carl. The other thing you guys have to understand is that we're all fairly casual, which I think it's important to keep as few barriers as possible between faculty and students, because it engenders a type of dialogue which is important for all of us. And so we're all on first name basis. If you came in early, we were all chit-chatting with each other. There's not a lot of, one of the reasons I really like Lawrence Tech, one of the reasons I'm there, it's a solid Midwest school. It's very pragmatic. It's focused on producing educated people who want to be architects and not something. They don't want to do architecture and then make a film. They want to produce architecture. They want to move into the building industry. They want to move into the built environment. But it's also quite relaxed. It's easy. It's very easy to get access to faculty. It's very easy to have a good conversation. And if Michelle and Natalie, who's texting me while we're talking, can tell you how high those barriers may not be. So we've been involved in online education for over 10 years. We've had the last 36 credits of our MArch put online I think we kicked it off, and Lynn can correct me, somewhere around 2007, 2008, we did the big push. So we've learned a lot, and we've been one of the really early adopters. Whenever I go to other universities and sometimes I run workshops, sometimes I do a lecture, I get cornered generally by the chair of the department and a couple of faculty who want to know how we do it, because they can't figure out how to do online education. A lot of universities are very resistant to doing this type of education. And so what we look at is actually not the educational industry. We look at the professional industry. And so we know we're fairly highly connected to small and large offices. Detroit's a hub for architecture. There's lots and lots of firms here. There's lots of projects going on, and a lot of those firms are international. And so when I talk to a faculty member and I say, I'm teaching a remote studio, an online studio, their eyes glaze over and they're like, I have no idea how you do that. I turn around and talk to a friend of mine who's the principal of a 400-person international firm, and I said, hey, do you want to come in and run a critique? By the way, it's online. He goes, yeah, no problem. I'm like, that's not a problem for you. He goes, no, because I do this every single day. I run 5 remote teams, and I've got 10 projects going on all around the world, and I'm doing reviews, and this is part of our everyday life. This is where the industry's going. I don't quite understand why the educational community can't seem to get there as well. So what we look at actually how the industry works, and we're using tools from the industry rather from our educational backgrounds. We need certain types of things to make this type of education work. One is a persistent whiteboard. We need a space, especially when we're dealing with studios type of information. We need a visual space that we can use to both collect all our information, to speak to each other, to draw on, which simulates the idea of the classroom, the desk, the studio space. We use Slack, which is a team-based synchronous and asynchronous communication tool. It's a texting tool, but it's group-based. And so we use that as a way of keeping all of our students together. We use Zoom, which we're using tonight, which is our synchronous space. This is the space where we have our dialogues. And so what we do, and this is, I'm going to get to this in the next slide, I'm going to talk about accreditation, but what we do is that what makes Lawrence Tech a very particular type of program is that we see online education as prioritizing synchronous contact as much as it does asynchronous. So what we do when we look at our courses, we look at the content of those courses and we say, okay, how much of that course can get offset to asynchronous information? How much can we encapsulate into a video? How much can we put into a website? And how much can we do that until we lose quality? There has to be, when we get to a point where if we take something out, we're going to decrease the ability to actually teach that material successfully. We're going to decrease the quality of the course. We stop. What's left is synchronous contact. So when we run a lecture class, it's easy to read a book, it's easy to watch a lecture, but if you want to have a discussion about something, you have to move into this format. You have to move into synchronous format. What these technologies allow us to do is to run all our classes synchronously, without residency requirements. You don't physically have to be in that place. We have people tonight from California, from Washington State, from Florida, right? We're all over the place, but we're all meeting in a space where we can talk to each other. This means that all of our classes, our online classes, have time requirements to them on a weekly basis. That's sometimes it changes depending on what type of class we're running. So a lecture class has less contact time than a studio class, but you have to expect to be in a virtual location at a point during the week on a day and every day, every week. That does occur. Although some people don't want this, they want a completely asynchronous. This is not the way we teach our courses just because of the type of content we're dealing with. It's very, very difficult to educate somebody properly if you abandon the synchronous type of this course. I'll move the next. So the other thing to understand about us is that a Master's of Architecture is a Master's of Architecture. We have one degree, and that's an accredited degree. We have 3 campuses, and we think about online as a campus. So we have a Southfield campus, a Detroit campus, and an online campus. The online students are just simply our students. There's no difference in our understanding of those students than there is from any of our other students, that we're all moving towards the same degree. And what that means, though, for us, we'll pop to the next slide, and that has to do with accreditation and equivalency. We have a requirement to our accreditation agency to prove that no matter what format our courses take, what dissemination, and online, all online is a dissemination format. It's a modality of delivering information. That's it. We have to prove that every class we offer, whether it's on ground, hybrid, or online, is equivalent. That the students coming out of that class have exactly the same experience. They've got the same learning objectives. They've learned the same stuff. They have the same abilities when they come out. So 1 degree, 3 campuses, absolute equivalency across all of our courses. What becomes really, really important, though, when we start dealing with this type of environment has to do with cohorts, and it has to do with belonging. And so it's really important that we build a group of students who know each other, that know how to speak to each other, that can lean on each other. And if you look at some of the research in pedagogy in teaching formats, it turns out you actually learn much less from the professor than you do from your fellow students. And so peer-to-peer learning is really, really critical for you to take in the concepts that are part of class, to practice them, to push against each other, to get help. And so we run a Slack back channel for the entire track 3 group that allows all students to talk to each other. They even have, Michelle, you'll have to tell me what's going on in it, but they even have private channels that are not visible to any of the faculty who are in that Slack as well. So the students can talk to students without oversight. I'm not sure what happens in it. I have no access to it. I originally set it up and then I left it, but I keep hearing stories about it, which is quite interesting. The other thing that we use Miro for is to allow for interaction between students, where we can always drop in and see a student's desk. Some other student can come by and see what somebody else is working on. They can leave notes for them. I'm going to show you a live demonstration of that once I get to the last slide, which should be the next one. So let me show you.
So I'm stopping sharing.
I'm going to share, and I'll share. So I'm just going to show you a mural environment. This is basically a classroom, and so, or a studio space. And this is live. This is real. This is from January to May of this year. This was a course I taught, which is Advanced Graduate Studio 2. So this was what we'd consider as a 5th year course. It's one of the last studios that you take. This is post-comprehensive, so we were dealing with architectural ideas that were fairly advanced. In this case, we're dealing with epistemology through diagenic environments and belief systems. So this is way past ordering systems and tectonics and color choices. But what it allows me to do, because it's real, this is not a fabricated space, and it's not something that we've made up just to show people. This is actually the course that did run, so you're having a glimpse at how that class operated. What it allows us to do is, as an instructor, I can throw a bunch of things up, right? And these are all the read-ins. It allows us to stick videos in there, any type of multimedia. And so these become the resources. I can move into, we worked in teams in the studio, and this is a record of all of the work that was done by the teams. Where 4 to 5 graduate students were on each team. And this is the in-progress work, starts back, and you can see 4 months ago, and on the very first meeting where the students were getting together and they were throwing their ideas down, and they were using these whiteboards to speak to each other. And as the project progressed and more information occurred, you can see the sticky notes, and each of the colors are different students being able to have dialogue with each other, people throwing drawings up, and starting to work out. They'd be on Zoom as well, where they'd be using my Zoom channel. I'd often find somebody in my Zoom channel chit-chatting, which was part of the studio space. The thing that I think, there are resources in the digital environment which are so much more significant than what we can do in a classroom. I've got to the point where I wish some of the things I could do online, I could do in the classroom. And the biggest one is this: archiving, which is what digital environments do really, really well. What you're looking at is the record of every single conversation had by this team with me as a critique across 4 months of a class, 16 weeks. So at any point, we can go back and we can watch the conversation that occurred at that point. So this was February the 2nd of 2019. And of course, it's not going to load tonight. But so what would happen is that there's complete transparency and there's no ability to hide at any point, because every conversation we have is recorded, and then we put it up on our private YouTube channel, and then linking into Mural and linking into Canvas, which is our content management system on the educational side. And then that allows students to backtrack. And what was really great this last year was that if I'm doing desk crits and I have a really good conversation, generally I have a really great conversation with the first student I have a desk crit for, but it covers issues that almost every student's going to deal with. That conversation goes out immediately to all the rest of the students, usually as a link through Slack. All the other students then watch that half-hour conversation before they get to me, so that they're already one step ahead. And so it accelerates learning in a really incredible way. We had students, at this point we were getting ready for final presentations. The students went back and they watched the first 3 introductory lectures that we did to remind themselves what it was that we were actually doing. It's just really quite an incredible resource. We can't simulate this on the ground yet. And there are days I wish I didn't have to repeat myself 16 times, which I don't when we get into these environments. But the ability to archive is just, get access to this information. The other thing, and I think maybe Michelle or both Michelle and Natalie can talk about this, was their ability to actually watch the conversations and critiques of other students to learn from what they were doing, even when you can accelerate the amount of time that you have with the faculty just by getting access to all the other recordings that we make during the course of a studio.